All right. Mr. Boswell to Dr. Johnson. Edinburgh, December 2nd, 1773. You shall have what information I can procure as to the order of the clans. A gentleman of the name of Grant tells me that there is no settled order among them, and he says that the Macdonalds were not placed upon the right of the army at Culloden. The Stuarts were. I shall, however, examine witnesses of every name that I can find here. Dr. Webster shall be quickened too. I like your little memorandums. They are symptoms of your being in earnest with your book of northern travels. Your box shall be sent next week by sea. You will find in it some pieces of the broom bush, which you saw growing on the old castle of Audenlech. The woods has a curious appearance when sawn across. You may either have a little writing standish made of it, or get it formed into boards for a treatise on witchcraft, by way of a suitable binding. To Mr. Boswell, Mr. Boswell to Dr. Johnson. Edinburgh, December 18th, 1773. You promised me an inscription for a print to be taken from an historical picture of Mary, Queen of Scots, being forced to resign her crown, which Mr. Hamilton of Rome has painted for me. The two following have been sent to me. Maria Scortrum, Regina Meliore, Seculo Digna, Jus Rugium Cibibus, Sendiosas in Vita Resignat, and Civis Sedidiose Mariam Scorotum Reginam Sese Minore Abdicare Ivitam Conjunt, or, as we all know, because we all know Latin at this point, Mary, Queen of Scots, worthy of a better age, reluctantly surrenders her rights to her rebellious people, as well as rebellious subjects forced Mary, Queen of Scots, against her will, to abdicate her office. That should probably happen today, if you know, following the news, but I digress. Be so good as to read the passage in Robertson, and see if you cannot give me a better inscription. I must have it both in Latin and English, so if you should not give me another Latin one, you will at least choose the best of these two and send a translation of it. And that's the end of that. His human and forgiving disposition was put to a pretty strong test on his return to London by a liberty which Mr. Thomas Davies had taken with him in his absence, which was to publish 2 volumes entitled Miscellaneous and Fugitive Pieces, which he advertised in the newspaper by the author of The Rambler. In this collection, several of Dr. Johnson's acknowledged writings, several of his anonymous performances, and some which he had written for others were inserted. But there was also some in which he had no concern whatever. He was at first very angry, as he had good reason to be. But upon consideration of his poor friend's narrow circumstances, and that he had only a little profit to view, and meant no harm, he soon relented and continued his kindness to him as formerly. In the course of his self-examination with retrospect to this year, he seems to have been much dejected. For he says, January 1st, 1774, "This year has passed with so little improvement that I doubt whether I have not rather impaired than increased my learning." And yet we have seen how he read, and we know how he talked during that period. He was now seriously engaged in writing an account of our travels in the Hebrides, in consequence of which I had the pleasure of a more frequent correspondence with him. To James Boswell, Esquire. Now, Johnson and James Bond, that's a book I'd like to read. Dear Sir, my operations have been hindered by a cough. At least, I flatter myself, that it is my cough had not come, I should have been further advanced. But I have had no intelligence from Dr. W. Webster, nor from the excise office, nor from you. No account of the little borough, this being the ancient borough of Prestwick in Ayrshire. Nothing of the Erse language. I have yet heard nothing in my box. I have yet heard nothing of my box. His box is still lost in the mail. You must make haste and gather me all you can, and do it quickly, or I will and shall do it without it. Make my compliments to Mrs. Boswell, and tell her that I do not love her the less for wishing me away. Still harping on that. I gave her trouble enough, and shall be glad, in recompense, to give her any pleasure. I would send some porter into the Hebrides, if I knew which way it could be got to my kind friends there. Inquire and let me know. Make my compliments to all the doctors of Edinburgh, and to all my friends, from one end of Scotland to the other. Write to me, and send me what intelligence you can, and if anything is too bulky for the post, let me have it by the carrier. I do not like trusting winds and waves. I am, dear sir, your most, and etc., January 29th, 1774, Sam Johnson. So I guess we're just moving into 1774 now. Boswell usually has a little transition thing, but he hasn't done that yet. So, no, just segueing right into that. All right. So now he's, Boswell is 65 around this time. I don't actually know when Johnson's birthday is. So I don't know if he's technically 65 yet, but he turned 65 in 1774. Anyway, to the same. Dear Sir, in a day or two after I had written the last discontented letter, I received my box, which was very welcome. But still I must entreat you to hasten Dr. Webster, and continue to pick up what you can that may be useful. Mr. Oglethorpe was with me this morning. Can I just say, I love saying Oglethorpe. I don't know if that's how you pronounce that name, but Oglethorpe is a very fun word to say. You know his errand. He was not unwelcome. Tell Mrs. Boswell that my good intentions toward her still continue. Being a little passive-aggressive here, Johnson. I should be glad to do anything that would either benefit or please her. Chambers is not yet gone, but so hurried, or so negligent, or so proud that I rarely see him. I have indeed, for some weeks past, been very ill of a cold and cough, and have been at Mrs. Thrale's, that I might be taken care of. I am much better. Nove redundat in praelia vires. Footnote here. Perhaps Johnson imperfectly remembered Nove redere in pristina veris. Newborn strength returned to its whilom vigor from the Aeneid. But I am yet tender and easily disoriented. How happy it was that neither of us were ill in the Hebrides. The question of literary property is this day before the Lords. Murphy drew up the appellant's case, that is, the plea against the perpetual right. I have not seen it, nor heard the decision. I would not have the right perpetual. I will write to you as any time occurs, and do you send me something about my Scottish friends. I have very great kindness for them. Let me know likewise how fees come in, and when we are to see you. I am, sirs, yours affectionately, London, February 7th, 1774, Sam Johnson. He at this time wrote the following letters to Mr. Stevens, his able associate in editing Shakespeare. To George Stevens, Esquire, in Hampstead. Sir, if I am asked when I have seen Mr. Stevens, you know what answer I might give. I must give. If I am asked when I shall see him, I wish you would tell me what to say. If you have Leslie's History of Scotland, or any other book about Scotland except Boetius and Buchanan, it will be a kindness if you send them to me, sir, your humble servant, February 7th, 1774, Sam Johnson. To the same. Sir, we are thinking to augment our club, and I am desirous of nominating you if you care to stand the ballots, and can attend on Friday nights at least twice in 5 weeks. Less than that is too little, and rather more will be expected. Be pleased to let me know before Friday. I am, sir, your most, etc., February 21st, 1774, Sam Johnson. To the same. Sir, last night you became a member of the club. If you call on me on Friday, I will introduce you. A gentleman, later footnotes here says Gibbon, proposed after you, was rejected. That's awkward. I thank you for Neander, but wish he were not so fine. I will take care of him. I am, sir, your humble servant, March 5th, 1774, Sam Johnson. To James Boswell, Esquire. Dear Sir, Dr. Webster's information were much less exact and much less determinate than I expected. They are indeed much less positive than, if he can trust his own book, which he had laid before me, he is able to give. Footnote here says this book was a manuscript account drawn up by Dr. Webster of all the parishes in Scotland, ascertaining their length, breadth, number of inhabitants, and distinguishing Protestant and Roman Catholics. This book had been transmitted to government, and Dr. Johnson saw a copy of it in Dr. Webster's possession. But I believe it will always be found that he who calls much for information will advance his work but slowly. I am, however, obliged to you, dear sir, for your endeavors to help me, and hope that between us something will sometime be done, if not on this, on some occasion. Chambers is either married or almost married to Miss Wilton, a girl of 16, exquisitely beautiful, whom he has, with his lawyer's tongue, persuaded to take her chance with him in the East. We have added to the club Charles Fox, Sir Charles Bunbury, Dr. Fordyce, and Mr. Stevens. Return my thanks to Dr. Webster. Tell Dr. Robertson I have not much to reply to his censure of my negligence, and tell Dr. Blair that since he has written hither what I said to him, we must now consider ourselves as even, forgive one another, and begin again. I care not how soon, for he is a very pleasing man. Pay my compliments to all my friends, and remind Lord Elibank of his promise to give me all his works. I hope Mrs. Boswell and little Miss her well. When shall I see them again? She is a sweet lady, only she was so glad to see me go that I have almost a mind to come again, that she may again have the same pleasure. Inquire if it be practicable to send a small present of a cask of porter to Dunvegan, Ransay, and Call. I would not wish to be thought forgetful of civilities. I am, sir, your humble servant, March 5th, 1774, Sam Johnson. On the 5th of March, I wrote to him, requesting his counsel whether I should be this spring come to London. I stated to him, on the one hand, some pecuniary embarrassments, which, together with my wife's situation at the time, made me hesitate, and on the other, the pleasure and improvement which my annual visit to the metropolis always afforded me, and particularly mentioned a peculiar satisfaction which I experienced in celebrating the festival of Easter in St. Paul's Cathedral. Now, to my fancy, it appeared like going up to Jerusalem at the feast of the Passover, and that the strong devotion which I felt on that occasion diffused its influence on my mind through the rest of the year. To James Boswell, Esquire. Not dated, but written about the 15th of March. Dear Sir, I am ashamed to think that since I received your letter I have passed so many days without answering it. I think there is no great difficulty in resolving your doubts. The reason for which you are inclined to visit London are, I think, not of sufficient strength to answer the objections. That you should delight to come once a year to the fountain of intelligence and pleasure is very natural. But both information and pleasure must be regulated by propriety. Pleasure which cannot be obtained but by unreasonable or unsuitable expense must always end in pain, and pleasure which must be enjoyed at the expense of another's pain can never be such as a worthy mind can fully delight in. What improvement you might gain by coming to London, you may easily supply or easily compensate by enjoying yourself some particular study at home, or opening some new avenue to information. Edinburgh is not yet exhausted, and I am sure you will find no pleasure here which can deserve either that you should anticipate any part of your future fortune, or that you should condemn yourself and your lady to penurious frugality for the rest of the year. I need not tell you what regard you owe to Mrs. Boswell's entreaties, or how much you ought to study the happiness of her who studies yours with so much diligence, and of whose kindness you enjoy such good effects. Life cannot subsist in society but by reciprocal concessions. She permitted you to ramble last year. You must permit her now to keep you at home. Your last reason is so serious that I am unwilling to oppose it. Yet you must remember that your image of worshipping once a year in a certain place is an imitation of the Jews is but a comparison, and simile non est idem. If the annual resort to Jerusalem was a duty to the Jews, it was a duty because it was commanded, and you have no such command, therefore no such duty. It may be dangerous to receive too readily and indulge too fondly opinions from which, perhaps, no pious mind is wholly disengaged of local sanctity and local devotion. You know what strange effects that have produced over a great part of the Christian world. I am now writing, and you, when you read this, are reading under the eye of omnipresence. To what degree fancy is to be admitted into religious offices, it would require much deliberation to determine. I am far from intending totally to exclude it. Fancy is a faculty bestowed by our Creator, and it is reasonable that all his gifts should be used to his glory, that all our faculties should cooperate in his worship. But they are to cooperate according to the will of him that gave them, according to the order which his wisdom has established. As ceremonies prudential or convenient are less obligatory than positive ordinances, as bodily worship is only the token to others or ourselves of mental adoration, so fancy is always to act in subordination to reason. We may take fancy for a companion, but we must follow reason as our guide. We may allow fancy to suggest certain ideas in certain places, but reason must always be heard when she tells us that those ideas in those places have no natural or necessary relation. Tell that to the President. When we enter a church, we habitually recall to mind the duty of adoration, but we must not omit adoration for want of a temple, because we know, and ought to remember, that the universal Lord is everywhere present, and that, therefore, to come to Jonah, or Iona, or to Jerusalem, though it may be useful, cannot be necessary. Thus I have answered your letter, and have not answered it negligently. I love you too well to be careless when you are serious. I think I shall be very diligent next week about our travels, which I have too long neglected. I am, dear sir, your most, etc., compliments to Madame and Miss Sam Johnson. Oh, that was a nice letter, wasn't it? I'm going to stop now because I'm reading so well right now. I've noticed I'm not flumbling over words. I'm not mispronouncing stuff. So I'm going to quit while I'm ahead. Till next time, bye from Boswell.